Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to have a really interesting session tonight with our guest, Nora Dunn. And you might remember Nora she has joined us before, and she talked about all of her epic train travels around the world. Tonight, she's going to be talking about living as a digital nomad. And she's been at this for quite a while, so she has a lot of expertise to share. She sold everything she owned, including a busy financial planning practice, to go off and travel the world in 2006. And she's been a career traveler ever since. So she's considered one of the original digital nomads and travel bloggers. And her website, which you might also remember from when we met her before, The Professional Hobo, she shares her adventures and misadventures there and is radically honest about the full-time, long-term travel lifestyle and the realities of working remotely while traveling. I think that not everyone shares that degree of honesty when they talk about it. It's always quite a rosy picture that's painted. So feel free to ask Nora whatever you want about what it's actually really like. She's a former certified financial planner. So she has really demonstrated that full-time travel can be financially sustainable, and she helps people design their ideal travel work lifestyles. And she has a real knack for detail, and she loves helping people with all the logistics and ensuring they have all the information they need to be successful. She's going to share some of that with us tonight. She's been featured in print, on television, radio, podcasts, and online on outlets like Forbes, Condé Nast Traveler, Business Insider, Lonely Planet, and Oprah. And I might add, Solo Traveler. She's also a writer and a personal finance spokesperson for the top personal finance site, NerdWallet, which I'd recommend checking out if you haven't. So all that being said, welcome, Nora, and thank you for being with us tonight.
Wow, thank you for the glowing introduction, Tracy. That is, I feel like there's a mic drop in there somewhere, but maybe we'll see if we can one up it and have multiple mic drops tonight, shall we?
Yes. So maybe we can start with sort of take us back a little bit and tell us how it is that you became a digital nomad in the beginning.
It was purely a lifestyle decision driven by my heart and definitely not by my head, because it was probably counterintuitive more than anything else. But it was back in 2006 when, the term or even the idea of digital nomadism did not exist. I was running my financial planning practice here in Toronto, Canada. I had a lifelong dream of really wanting to travel the world in a very culturally immersive way. Like, I really wanted to understand how the children played. What do the adults talk about around the dinner table? How do people shop? How do they cook? How do they eat? I really wanted to basically crack the code culturally of countries around the world. And I'd found that up to that time, I would take trips, but they would be vacations of limited duration. And I was never able to really kind of sink my teeth into cultures and understand countries really well. And my last traditional vacation was a month in South Africa. I thought, all right, I'm taking a month. I'm going to South Africa. I'm gonna crack the code of the country. And people, in Canada thought I was crazy for going away for a month. I mean, that was unheard of at that time. And I, of course, got down there and people would say, so how many months are you here for? And I thought, months? Are there people who travel for months at a time? And I discovered that, yes, in fact, actually, that North America is kind of the no vacation nation, but there are people in the world who actually can travel for longer periods of time. And there are some people even who make travel a lifestyle. So that was the first of a few kind of moments I had. Then, of course, anyone who's ever been to South Africa knows that this is an extremely nuanced country, and I had no hope of being able to crack the code in a month. So, of course, I left with more questions and answers and returned to my life in Toronto, still with this niggling desire to be able to experience the world in a more immersive way. And then one thing over the next 6 months, one thing led to another, to an ultimate day of reconciliation where I just thought, okay, I need to make a life change. And I ultimately realized that if I wanted to travel the world, if I wanted to satisfy this lifelong dream of mine, and if I wanted to not have this as a regret at the end of the day, then I had to make it a lifestyle. I had to go with an open-ended ticket, and I had to just see where the world would take me. So I did do that. I sold everything I owned, including my financial planning practice. Terribly counterintuitive at the time. I'd poured all the blood, sweat, and tears into building this business. And technically all I had to do was sit back and make less and less money and make more and more money and work less and less for the rest of my career. And yet here I am 17 years later. I did make a go of it. I didn't know where I would go, what I would do, how I would make money. Like I didn't know any of it. I was just guided by this fierce desire to live life in this way, and to follow my heart and see where it went. So it worked out. I don't normally suggest that people do it that way these days, but I mean, who am I to tell people they shouldn't follow their hearts? Definitely, if your heart is guiding you in one direction or another, go for it. But I definitely, now that there is an infrastructure for people to work remotely and to live and travel long term and to set up their finances and their affairs so they can do it effectively and stress-free, I generally say, if you want to try this out, put a little more of a science to it than I did, because I hit a lot of bumps on that learning curve, and I really shouldn't wish that process on anybody. I mean, learning, it's half the fun, but really it's not. There's a lot more fun you can have on the road that doesn't involve making the mistakes I made along the way. So.
See, this is what I meant about Nora really telling it how it is. So how let's see, it's interesting that you said that there wasn't actually a term, digital nomad as a term didn't exist at that time, because that was actually one of my questions, because I thought, wow, that's really, I don't remember that. I mean, it's a very recent sort of phenomenon. How did you, without that term, how did you describe it to people, what it was that you wanted to do in that time, given that it would have been such an unusual, more unusual thing then?
I didn't even have the makings of an online career when I decided to travel full time. That was, I'm not going to say it was my first mistake, but it's certainly something that I don't suggest people do, because when it did, I mean, it wasn't until I'd been on the road for maybe 6 months that the light bulb went off for me, and I realized that my lifelong penchant for the written word and my talent for writing, plus a laptop and an internet connection, could actually equate to making a living online. Because again, remote work, location independent, these terms also did not exist. So for me, I felt like I was the first person to ever figure this out, that was even possible, which of course, I wasn't. I was a pioneer only in my own mind in that sense. But I definitely felt like I was figuring it all out, and it was an interesting process for me, because my initial career ambitions were centered around building a freelance writing career, because travel blogs were online journals that people wrote for personal creative endeavors, and that's exactly what mine was as well. So my career-based endeavors were centered around freelance writing for major publications. And what happened, there's something kind of interesting happened along the way, is finance publications would hire me to write about travel, because I had that personal finance expertise and I could marry those topics. And then travel publications would hire me to write about finance. And somewhere in there, I was able to carve out or find myself in this niche of the finance of travel. And that really served me quite well. And then a few years later, when travel blogs became a thing and possible businesses and monetizable, I became recognized as one of the first travel blogs out there, which is probably the only thing I really did right when it comes to the business of travel blogging. But we'll save that for another talk. But it was so, but initially I didn't know what I wanted to do. I mean, I didn't know how I would make money. I did, though, have a 2-year stream of income from the sale of my financial planning practice. I had about $2,000 a month for 2 years is what I was paid by my financial planning practice. So I knew, and I set myself the challenge. I thought, okay, this isn't a lot of money, but it'd be really nice to see if I can live and travel around the world with that as my budget, so I don't have to touch my savings. And then my intention was that at the end of that 2-year period, when that money ran out, I would like to have a replacement for that in the form of my freelance writing career. So I didn't totally throw caution to the wind, with no money and no savings and just figure it out. I had a plan. And I had a stream of income that could float me while I was figuring out how to build the business. These days, I generally say, if you are looking to hit the road, if you're starting a side hustle or an online business or some kind of online career, I generally suggest you get the foundation of that career established before you start traveling. Because the problem that I had was I was not only working on building my online career, but then I was also working on figuring out how to travel full time and trying to carve out my own personal style of travel and trying to actually experience the world while I was moving through it. So it was a lot of multitasking that I don't generally wish on other people. So that's part of one of the mistakes I made, where I generally say, if you can get the foundations of that business going first, definitely at the very least, get some kind of stream of income coming in. So you don't always have to be worried about paying for the next meal, as it were.
Right. Okay. Good advice. So I think that a lot of people probably wonder, it's people know a lot about travel bloggers and that they work remotely often. But I assume there are all sorts of businesses that people could be, all different types of work people could be doing remotely. And I've met many digital nomads in your travels. Can you give us a bit of a sense of the different types of work that people are doing?
This is another one of those things that has changed so dramatically since the pioneer days of 2006. It's really incredible. It used to be that anyone who worked online prior to the pandemic, the standard careers that people who worked online had were generally something around writing or coding or web development or, web-based services. But of course, even prior to the pandemic, but certainly during and after the pandemic, during the pandemic, the world was forced to go remote or become obsolete. So millions upon millions of people's jobs were converted into things that could be done remotely. And now, as we are emerging from the pandemic, many of these people's jobs continue to remain remote, and people have the ability now to explore the options of traveling long-term while working remotely. So, what can you do? A lot of things, almost anything. I wouldn't even want to start naming things, because that would exclude all the other things I didn't name in terms of what's possible that you can do online in terms of earning a living. It's really a whole new world now of possibility that has, if we look for silver linings, this is certainly one of them. We are a much more mobile society now, and that gives us around the world, including in countries that have don't have the sort of privilege and opportunities that we do in North America. There's a lot more opportunities available now.
Okay. Yeah, we were talking about that today, actually, that thinking that the pandemic must have had an impact, and that even now it's just easier, I would think, to ask, you might love your job but know that it's something that doesn't require you to be in the office all the time. That even just posing the question to an employer now would be received in a different way than it might have been 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that, because I remember reading prior to the pandemic a number of articles about, how to approach your employer to see if you can work remotely. And there was like this huge, nuanced strategies that you had to do, and negotiating this and that and the other. And now it's a totally different world, and it's a totally different process. Something, though, that some remote employees may find a challenge is not all employers are necessarily down with the idea of their employees working abroad, working from other countries. And that's for a few different reasons. One of which is, I think that there's a perception that if you're traveling, your heart isn't in the working, you're not going to be able to do the work to the same degree or level of competency, or be able to apply the same level of concentration to it. But there are also, that's overcomeable, ultimately, that's something that that's a little more nebulous. But In some cases, there are tax challenges depending on where you are, depending on the kind of work you do, whether you're, it's contract involved. Like there's certain business activities that if they happen geographically in certain areas, depending on that company's structure worldwide, it could subject them to additional tax problems, which is why they don't want their employees working from abroad. I would hazard a guess that the legitimate occasions of that really being the challenge are actually few and far between, but it does seem to be a common misconception that a lot of employers will default to. Oh no, I can't, there's going to be tax problems. No, you got to stay here. So that's the current challenge for a lot of remote employees who are looking to travel long-term, is that their employers might not always be totally on board with it.
Right. It is an interesting thing now that I think it used to be seen as, if you were a digital nomad, it was because you were self-employed or you had your own business. But I assume now, because it's become more accepted, that there are also more people who are employees who are working away from away from the office.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are 3 categories of work that you can have, or 3 categories of jobs that you can have that will allow you to be a digital nomad. One of which is you are a remote employee for a company. You've got a steady paycheck and you clock in, as it were, as an employee telecommuting. Second, you could be a freelancer. So technically you work for yourself, but you'll have many clients. So it's almost like you have a bunch of different bosses, but you definitely call the shots a lot more about the sort of work that you do and what you take. And then the third is that you might run an online business. Now, it basically, all digital nomads are remote workers, but not all remote workers are digital nomads, in that you could work remotely and never travel, and that's okay. And it is, you don't have to be self-employed. You don't have to run a business. You don't have to, a lot of people think, oh, the only way they can hit the road is they've got to start a side hustle and they've got to be a business owner and a tycoon, and they want it. And that's not everybody's cup of tea. So there are definitely opportunities. I encourage people to take a look at their skill sets, what they can offer, take a look at their temperaments and what kind of things they like to do. I was an employee once. And I still have, to this day, I have what I call barista fantasies. And that is because when I was an employee, I was ridiculously fast at what I did. And I worked in a cubicle in an office, but I was really efficient. And I often had my work done for the day by like noon. Except instead of being given the possibility or opportunity to do what I wanted to do, I mean, I didn't even mind staying in the office if I had to, but let me read a book, or let me even take a professional development course to further no, I had to pretend to be busy. And that was soul destroying. That was more soul destroying than the work itself. So one day, in an absolute righteous fit, this was part of my moving off and running into, becoming my own employee, my own boss, I said, that's it. I'm going to work for myself. That way, when my work is done for the day, I can do whatever I want. The irony with that statement is, when you work for yourself, your work is never done for the day. And not everybody deals with that very gracefully. I'm one of those people, but I do manage. But it's not everybody's cup of tea to work for yourself. So know yourself. Know whether or not you would prefer the stability of working for an employer. There are tons of remote work possibilities now that mean you don't have to be all the things if that's not your style.
Okay, good advice. I really identify with that idea of, my first job after high school was working for the government. And if that doesn't turn you into someone who would prefer to be self-employed, I don't know what does. But
right.
I had a summer job once, actually, with the government. And the thing I learned from that summer was how to look busy when I had nothing to do. Isn't
that worse? Like, wouldn't you just rather be busy?
Well, and when you're 16, it's shocking. Because I went there and I thought, oh, can I do this? It's going to be so much work. I don't know if I'm going to be able to manage it. I managed it by 11 o'clock. And then I was sitting, reading, but the book was inside a file folder so that people thought I was reading a file. But yeah, so
Tracy.
Okay. Yes.
Tracy, we've got a question here.
Oh, good.
Kobe would like to know, how do you stay connected? And then also a question about what kind of gear do you always take with you? So let's take it one at a time. How do you stay connected?
All right. These are my favorite kinds of questions. I nerd out on this stuff. I wrote an article on my website about how to stay connected because it's different for everybody depending on where you are, what kind of phone you have, and what your needs are. But generally speaking, what I do is actually, can I get where is everyone? Most people are here from the States, but there's a few from Canada. All right. So I'm going to speak to an American audience with this answer to the question. However, if there are any Canadians out there that want the ultimate hack, including Janice, Tracy, and King, I'm telling you, I spend annually, I don't know why more Canadians won't listen to me on this. I don't care if you travel or not. I spend a total of about $200 per year on all of my telecommunications costs, including my global data, my phone number, and everything. And Canada is the most expensive country in the world for telecommunications. So Canadians, hear me now. I got you.
Okay.
But in the States, it's not quite as simple as that, but it definitely can be. So there's a few things you want to think about. First of all, ultimately, if we're talking about lifestyle design, are you going forever or are you going for now? Because if you're going for now, you're probably going to want to keep your US phone number. Even if you're going forever, you're probably going to want to keep your US phone number. So there's a few different companies and plans that you can use to do that. Google Fi used to be the go-to because they had a really international data-friendly phone plan and it was very inexpensive. However, Google Fi has started shutting people down if they're not in the States during enough time. However, you still can always have that phone number. So they offer very cost-effective phone numbers. You can have your phone number with Google Fi, and what you would need to do is you need to have that phone number will work over data or Wi-Fi. So what you need to do is make sure that wherever you are in the world, you've got data or a Wi-Fi connection. And my solution to that, and it doesn't matter where you're from in the world, this is the solution. I have done my homework, trust me, is a company called Flexaroam. And they offer global data SIM cards. Now, it's not a 100% intuitive process when you start getting in, when you look at their website and when you look at their prices and you look at their local and regional plans and all these things. My advice is to keep it as simple as possible. Whether you're going with Flexaroam or, sorry, I'm getting a phone call. Why do people always call me when I'm doing these things? Okay. Whether you are using Flexaroam or Airalo or KeepGo or any of these data SIM card services, there's a few things to think about. Global data that will work for you anywhere in the world is going to be your most expensive option, but it's also going to be the most flexible for you. What this means is no matter where you go, no matter what your plans are, as soon as that plane lands, you have a connection. Versus choosing a local or regional plan and having to decide how much data am I going to use in this country while I'm here. And if I don't use it, I'm going to lose it. And then I need to, how is this going to work? And when do I enact it? And it's a pain in the butt. So I always suggest going with the global data. I like to keep things as simple as possible. So I use that everywhere I am in the world. That ensures that no matter where I am, when, how, as soon as I land, I have a data connection. And that data connection allows me to not only do things like catch an Uber from the airport and make sure I have a connection and stay connected to people through messaging, but then it helps my phone number to work because I have an online phone number that just works for Canadians. Americans can also have an online phone number through something called Hushed. And that is a service, it's an app that gives you a phone number that would, that will work over Wi-Fi or data. So if you really want to keep it simple, go to Hushed, get your online phone number. You can port your existing number to it so you can keep your original number, get a global data SIM card, and you're good. Not everybody is really comfortable with that though. So Americans also have an option with T-Mobile has a really popular international roaming plan, but it ain't cheap. I've been looking at the prices. I'm like, oof, man, okay. If you want a traditional phone plan that will work for you anywhere in the world and that will give you data, it definitely works. And if that's what you need to give yourself that comfort level of getting out onto the road and then exploring some maybe less traditional ways of staying connected, then that's great. The last key to staying connected is as long as I have Wi-Fi and data everywhere that I go, a phone number is almost irrelevant. The only reason I really need a phone number is to get like verification texts from my bank, or, if my dad needs to call me because he hasn't figured out how to use WhatsApp yet. Like it's very little. There's very little reason why I need that phone number. So I have it, but most people are able to you can stay connected with them through WhatsApp. That's probably globally the most common way people like to stay in touch, because that offers not only messaging, but also video and audio calls. But then there's also, other messaging services, iMessage, Facebook Messenger. Skype is kind of an old dog, but it is still around, and you can have a phone number with Skype as well. So there's a lot of different options depending on the nature of your trip and your lifestyle.
Canadian connecting information, is there a source for that?
The fancy phone number that I was alluding to is an app called Fongo, Fongo. It is free. For a small fee, you could port your phone number to it, so you can keep your phone number, and then you can make and receive calls to and from Canada while you are anywhere in the world, totally for free. All you need is a Wi-Fi or data connection. So for the last 6 years, Fongo has been my phone number, and Flexiroam has been my global data connection, and I don't need anything else.
Wow.
And I use that at home and abroad, like 365.
And do you have posts on both American and Canadian comp plans?
Yeah, I do. I do have an article about using your cell phone abroad.
Okay, so we'll get that from you at the end and share it with everybody in our follow-up here. So the second part of the question was, what kind of gear do you always take with you?
So aside from the regular, I'm going to have the laptop and the phone, and I'm going to have the, various things, but there's a couple of things that I bring with me that I think, there's one thing in particular that I can think of that most people wouldn't think of off the top of their head, but it really has been a game changer for me in a variety of different ways. And it's a travel extension cord / surge protector / power bar. And it's great. It's small. It's about that big. And it's got a couple of outlets that you can plug anything into, like any kind of plug configuration from anywhere in the world, you can plug that into. And it's also got 4 USB ports. And then what you do is and then it's also got like 6 feet of cord that normally just wraps around it. So you can unwrap that and plug that into the wall. Now, this is so instrumental on a variety of levels. First of all, I don't know, anyone I think who has probably traveled for any amount of time has found at some stage of the game, you get to your accommodation and the outlets are horribly placed. Like there's no outlet by the bed, so you can't plug your phone in, or there's no outlet by, what you would want to make as a desk, so you can't plug your computer in. There's always some reason why it's just awkward and terrible. This solves that problem because it's got that 6 feet of extension to it. So you can plug one outlet, plug that in, and you have the ability to plug in 4 USB devices and 2 plug devices into it. So you can plug all your stuff into it, and it's really handy. So I never, ever, ever, ever go away without that. That's definitely something that I really like. Should I say something else, or is that a good one? Did I just?
No, that's a
that
great one. That's a great one.
That's a really good one. And I've never even thought of that. But I remember, I've stayed in so many hotels. I remember very few of them. I remember the one that had the best placed outlets, and the one and then the one that had a lap desk that you could work in bed.
Oh.
Yeah, for sure.
Totally.
Okay.
I was just going to say, on that note, I have on my YouTube channel, I have taken to doing lots of travel tips and gear reviews lately. I actually do a review of the exact extension cord surge protector. So if you want to check out my YouTube channel, just go to YouTube and search for Nora Dunn. You'll find me, and then you can see my actual walkthrough of how that works.
Okay. Maybe we'll get that link from you as well.
Sure.
That'd be good. Okay. So Nora, were you able truly to travel for $2,000 a month? And if so, where did you go? And what was your mode of travel? How'd you pull it off?
Brilliant question. Short answer, yes. Surprisingly, I surprised myself as much as anyone else. And the way that I did it, in fact, actually, I found that my cost, especially initially, my cost to travel full-time was significantly less than I ever spent to live in one place. And that was surprising to me. So surprising, in fact, that for my first 10 years of full-time travel, I tracked every dollar that I spent, personally and professionally, like all in, all the money that I spent. And I tracked all the money that I earned, and I published it every single year to prove that full-time travel could be financially sustainable. So in this process, I also ended up inadvertently coining this term called financially sustainable travel. And what that is it's based on 3 pillars. The first pillar of financially sustainable travel is earning money remotely. The second pillar is making creative, conscious spending choices. I'm going to get to that in a minute. And the third is ultimately balancing the first 2 so you can travel as long as you want. This is one of the reasons why actually when people ask me to provide digital nomad budget lifestyle templates, I refuse, because no budget is the same for 2 people. Everybody has different, because if your income is higher, you'll make different spending choices than if your income is lower. And such was the case for me when I started out. I had $2,000 a month. I knew I had to make certain choices. Now, serendipitously, in the beginning of my travels, I also stumbled into a whole way of traveling and living around the world that involved getting free accommodation. So accommodation is going to be your biggest expense on the road, bar none. If you can get it for free, then you're going to obviously inherently spend a lot less. In fact, I saved over $100,000 in my first 10 years by getting my accommodation largely for free in that time. I literally wrote the book on it. There's 5 different ways to get free accommodation. Some of them are more conducive to the digital nomad lifestyle than others. But I had a chance to try out all these different forms of free accommodation and these ways of living and traveling around the world. And not only did it give me a free place to stay, and before you conjure up visions of me being stuck in a dirty, sweaty dorm room or staying in a cardboard box on the side of the road, I assure you, I was staying in some of the most glorious places that I would never otherwise have been able to afford. So it is not all a compromise by any stretch of the imagination. But not only did I have these amazing experiences, save all this money, but I also had these really amazing, unique, culturally immersive experiences that I would never have had a chance to have any other way. And these were opportunities for me to live locally and, again, satisfy what I really wanted to get out of travel, which was this idea of really immersing myself in the places that I was visiting. The last thing that this way of traveling helped me save money and spend less money was that in many cases, these were positions or posts that I did for months at a time, which now meant that I was traveling slowly. And that is a real key to saving money when you travel. Is one of the biggest mental obstacles for new digital nomads or anyone who travels long-term to get over is that travel as a lifestyle is not the same as a vacation. And that's important on so many levels, financially, emotionally, logistically. It's so important. But when you do travel slowly, you will inherently spend less money. And it's a downright necessity if you're working remotely concurrent as well. So I was in fact able to live on less than $2,000 a month for those years and the years beyond it as well. And you can see my income and expense reports on my site if you gotta look hard, but they're in there. I think you can get to them from my About page.
Okay. Do we have any other questions, or that's it for now?
That's it for now.
Okay, feel free to pop any questions into the chat. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep on asking. So let's see. How you decide that you want to be a digital nomad. How do you decide where to go? Or how did you decide where to go? And then where to go next and next?
It's so funny. I just recently did a reel about this because this is another really big challenge for people who are getting into the lifestyle. My destinations, a lot of the time, most of the time, tend to choose me rather than the other way around. And they choose me in the form of a unique opportunity, something that has called to me, something that's, in many cases in the initial years, it was a free accommodation gig. It was something, I would belong to a house sitting website and I'd see this gig. I'd be like, oh, that's really interesting. And boom, I would have this sense of knowing as well. I had that with some volunteer gigs as well. Like my very first work trade volunteer gig was in Hawaii. It was not a place that was necessarily on my list of places to go, but I was perusing this newsletter with work exchange opportunities, and this thing came up on Hawaii, and I just suddenly had this moment where I thought, oh, well, I guess I'm going to Hawaii next. And I hadn't even reached out to the property owner yet. Like, that was pretty gutsy of me to think that I was going, but I did go, and it did work. So, I don't know, maybe my intuition was on top at that time. So I tend to go where the opportunities are. So that opportunity could be a free accommodation gig. It could be a house sitting opportunity. It could be a conference I want to attend. It could be an opportunity to stay with some people I know who are in the area. It could be, a specific tour, or whatever it is. There is usually something that calls to me. The challenge is it doesn't always call to me on my timeline. So there are occasionally times when I find I'm thinking, where am I going to go next? Like, what's happening? I want to know what's happening. And I have to sit with that, just waiting for the next thing to come. I usually have some kind of plan B, like, well, I can go stay with this friend here if I want, or I could go find an opportunity there. Because now as well, one of the things that I'm more interested in exploring in the coming years is more of these co-living and co-working opportunities that are out there. There's just been an explosion of opportunities for people who work remotely to connect with other people who work remotely, other digital nomads around the world, through these opportunities called co-living and co-working. And co-living in its simplest form is really, it's a way, it could be a converted boutique hotel or just a very large house. Everyone gets their own room and usually their own bathroom, but then they share the living room, the kitchen. There's usually, inherently there's going to be good internet, and there's usually some kind of space that is work friendly for people as well. And that's nice because, especially if you're traveling solo, I want to have my own space. I am an introvert at heart, so I want to make sure that there is a place that I can go to and close the door and have my own space to be able to be and work and have my own time. But also too, it's nice to be able to connect, collaborate, kibitz with people who are like-minded. And people who are like-minded are those who share this lifestyle and this ability to work remotely and travel the world, and this passion for connecting with people around the world in that way. So that's something that I'm going to be looking more at in the coming year. So if I ever don't have something to do, that might be something that I would look at in terms of planning my activities. But it's going to be different for everybody. One thing I would suggest is there's another way that I like to, that I'm exploring traveling the world, and it's through passion. It's through hobbies and activities. And there's a lot of people who do this already, right? If you are an avid scuba diver, you're probably going to choose destinations that are good for diving, right? And then you're going to show up at a local dive shop, and then you're going to connect with the dive shop staff, and that's going to be your connection with the locals. And then you're also going to connect with the other travelers who are showing up to do the diving. Some people are into Toastmasters. Some people are into Rotary. Some people are into rock climbing. Some people are into hashing. There's lots of different ways that people can connect with other travelers with this underlying, or with locals as well, with this underlying common interest. And my latest underlying common interest that I'm exploring more is dancing. Specifically salsa and bachata dancing. So I've dove, I'm diving. God, I'm a writer and I don't even know the right tense for diving. I have been diving into dancing. And now that will be a way that I will connect with people around the world. And that could also, if I want to reverse engineer it, that could inform how I choose the next place that I go as well. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you mentioned about that there are more accommodations really just kind of designed for digital nomads. And I was just reading recently that there are hotels that are making working space for people who are doing this, so that they have a good spot to work. Are there other types of resources that exist now for digital nomads that didn't when you started?
Oh my God, the list is unending. of opportunities and resources and companies and websites and things that can help you live this lifestyle more effectively. And that's actually become a really big focus now for me in terms of the content that I'm now producing for my website. Is I want to provide these resources for people. So, if you show up on my homepage now, you'll see, there's co-living and co-working programs, there's digital nomad retreats, there's conferences. I'm about to kick out an article shortly of accommodation, like alternatives to Airbnb that digital nomads can use to book accommodation. I've got another article I'm researching on these local co-living gigs and opportunities that are out there. And the more research I do, like I say, I'm going to write an article about co-living, and then I come up with just like my research will turn up this gigantic list of co-living, and I'll realize I've got to break that into 3 different articles. So there's just more and more and more coming out there in terms of how you can live, travel, and work effectively around the world. So it's I mean, shameless plug, check out the Professional Hobo. There's lots of tools and tricks there.
Well, we'll definitely include that in the email that we send out with the video. We'll
got it.
Sure. I got a couple of questions here. Did you ever have issues with the different countries' limits of stay based on your passport and visa?
A great question, and something that again has changed significantly since the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, digital nomads were a giant gray area. We weren't tourists per se, but we weren't also like, I wasn't doing a job. I wasn't taking a job away from a local, so I didn't need a working visa. And I wasn't doing business with anybody in the country, so I didn't need a business visa. So the default visa was a tourist visa. So that meant that I was then at the mercy of whatever the tourist visa requirements were for that country based on my passport of origin. So that is obviously a very different situation depending on where you're from and where you're visiting. But I was always able to make it work. I lived for 2 years in the Caribbean, and I had a base on the Caribbean island of Grenada. And their tourist visa was only, it was a couple of months, maybe 3 months. I'm not even sure now. I can't recall, but it wasn't long. And it was something that required visa runs. So I had to leave the country and come back, but I could still have that base and I could still do those visa runs. I also spent 2 years in Peru, same deal. You could get a visa on arrival for 6 months. And then if you left the country and came back in, you could get a renewal. They've since become a little more strict about that. So people tend to they work with the circumstances that are given to them and they find ways around it. In some cases, you can apply for residency visas. But what's changed since the pandemic now is this confluence of remote work visas and digital nomad visas. I use heavy air quotes around the whole digital nomad visa idea because what happened was during the pandemic, all these countries around the world, they saw the remote work trends happening as well. And they went, hey, we want to jump on this. We want these people to come here because they're going to earn money outside of the country and they're going to bring it in and they're going to spend it in the country. So digital nomads are a hot commodity in that sense. But they didn't really know what they didn't know, right? They didn't know they're not really looking for digital nomads. They're looking for remote workers who just want to spend, 6 months abroad in their country. So they, in some cases, they set these really bizarre, they created these visas thinking that, that's it, create the visa and they're going to be knocking down our doors. And I think they realized that that's actually it's not as simple as creating a visa. So countries are becoming a lot more thoughtful in how they are trying to make themselves attractive to digital nomads, not only in providing a visa that might allow you to stay a little bit longer than a tourist visa might allow you to, but then also to provide, infrastructure and ease of getting accommodation and some easier ways of living and working in that country. And in some cases to being really clear about taxes. And I know that we have a question about taxes. I could just segue right into that, Janice, if you want as well. All right, let's segue right in. Because this is also international tax planning is another whole element of the digital nomad lifestyle that is evolving very quickly. For myself, and first of all, US citizens, as long as you remain a US citizen, you will have to file taxes in the States every year without fail. Doesn't even matter if you're a resident of another country, you must still file your taxes in the US. Now, ideally, you will also have, there will be a reciprocal tax treaty between the country where you're spending time and the States, such that you're not getting double taxed. But there is still that pain in the neck of having to do that. The good news is if you are physically out of the country for, I think it's 11 months of the year, I'd have to double check on that, you will qualify for the FEIE, which is short for Foreign Earned Income Exclusion. And what that means is you do not have to pay any tax on the first 100,000, I think it's up to $110,000 of your income. Still got to file, but with that exclusion, you don't have to pay tax on that portion of your income. So where do you pay tax? Well, it depends on where you're going and how long you're staying there. If you are not staying anywhere long enough to be a resident of that place and you are traveling on tourist visas, technically there are no tax obligations outside of your country. So for myself, over all of the years, because I was always traveling on tourist visas, because there was no alternative, as a Canadian, what I did was I just continued to file my Canadian taxes every single year. I claimed my worldwide income that I made from different clients and sources around the world on my Canadian taxes. And it was in Canada, we call it you're a factual non-resident. So I didn't actually become a real non-resident. I just kind of became a pretend non-resident. But I continued to file my taxes every year. The irony being, or the glory being, as the case may be, as a travel content creator, that also meant that every single dollar I spent was a tax deduction one way or another. So I am a poor woman on paper because I do not make a lot of money because of the level of deductions that I have. But it also meant that I never actually had any tax obligations. And in fact, I often got refunds. So that worked out well. But if you are looking at restructuring your tax situation, or you're looking at the digital nomad lifestyle as a longer term event, I do recommend that you take a look at global tax strategy options. Definitely consult with someone who has the ability to advise you accordingly. I do know a woman, actually a friend and colleague of mine, who offers free global tax strategy webinars for people who are looking to really level up and consider where they might want to structure, how they might want to structure their businesses and personal residencies if they really want to hack it in terms of becoming a global citizen.
That's great. That's really fun. And okay, finally, maybe not finally, but we are running out of time. What about medical care? Does one keep their family doctor? How does travel insurance work for a longer length of time away from Canada or away from home? And also going to various countries, because some, insurance is very specific about what country you're going to, and others are not. So what do you do about that?
So I have experience on three sides of insurance. I have experience as a former financial planner. I actually was also an insurance agent, so I understood the insurance industry really in a very professional way. And then obviously as a traveler, I've owned policies, and then I've also had experience making claims. So I've been on a few sides of this coin. And I will say, first of all, the most important insurance to have, and one that is absolutely non-negotiable as far as I'm concerned, is emergency travel medical insurance or care of some sort. That is what will bankrupt you if you are in the wrong place at the wrong time and you have the wrong accident happen. And it doesn't just need to be in the States. I mean, I spoke with someone who was traveling in, it was a developing country. It shouldn't have been an expensive problem, but because there was an evacuation involved, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars that, had she not had insurance, would have ruined her and the rest of her life, financially speaking. So if you cannot afford insurance, you cannot afford to travel. Do not be that person that goes, oh, something happens to me on the road, I'm just going to crowdfund and the universe will take care of me. No, I will unfriend you and I will block you. Don't do it. Do not be that person. Take care of yourself and do it through insurance. So again, depending on your country of origin and your residence, your options will vary. Americans, you can travel with regular travel insurance all the time. It will cover you everywhere in the world except the States, generally speaking. So the travel medical insurance, again, there's a couple different kinds of insurance. There's, trip cancellation insurance, and there's baggage lost and theft, and there's this and that. There's all, but the important one is the travel medical insurance. This will cover a medical emergency abroad. It will not cover, however, doctor's visits, prescription medications, routine things. If it's not an emergency, it won't usually be covered under your travel insurance policy. However, the good news is 9 times out of 10, the cost of medical care around the world is easy to pay for out of pocket. And you can do what I call self-insuring with that. It's really the medical emergencies that you want to take care of. So that's a strategy that helps you keep your premiums low or lower. And then, you do have to self-insure the idea, the routine stuff, but it will generally cost you less. And you might actually be surprised at the number of, if you have prescriptions that you need, you might actually be surprised at what you can get over the counter in lots of countries around the world. I've talked my way into all kinds of prescription meds just by asking.
Okay, so that was pretty fantastic. And it also we're kind of running low on time, and it leads into the fact that next month we have in this slot, in our speaker slot, we actually have 3. We've got a panel, an American travel insurance expert, a Canadian travel insurance expert, and a World Nomads, more universal, that also takes care of adventure travelers that are doing things a little bit more risky, shall we say. So,
Awesome.
So that's next month, this time next month. So how perfect is that? that you had that position on there. So that's great.
So the next question then for you to ask them next month, especially the Canadian one, because I know that Terry, you were curious about Canadians who were gone for a longer period of time. The challenge is that if you lose your provincial coverage, you no longer qualify for travel insurance. So make sure next month that you ask that question and see what solutions they have. The 3-word solution that I can give you is international medical insurance or expat insurance, but that's another conversation.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, I have one question left. What would you say are some personal characteristics that would really help a person to be successful as a digital nomad?
What is coming to me right off the top of my head, the first word is flexibility. Not only will flexibility help you, because travel is going to throw all kinds of stuff at you that you could not possibly have predicted, good, bad, and otherwise. So your ability to roll with the punches is going to not only help you kind of survive and make the most of an experience, but also to thrive and enjoy it. And that also gives you the opportunity to jump on things that will come to you. Like you might have I was just chatting with a friend of mine. She was in Turkey and she met a local who ended up buying her tea and then ended up becoming her impromptu guide for the day. And it was really, she was describing this experience. Had she not been flexible and open to someone, and also using here's the next ingredient I think is important, is instinct and intuition, right? She used her instinct and her intuition. She judged that this was not someone who was necessarily trying to scam her or take advantage of her in some way. It was just someone who legitimately wanted to practice English and had not seen a tourist in his town for ages and was interested in the cultural exchange. And then the third thing that I think is really important is street sense. So the ability to again, you can use your intuition to figure out to feel somebody or feel a situation out, but then it's also important to have the tools to be able to travel securely and to have that street sense, to understand the scams that might be available and to make sure that you hedge against those potential problems, and to carry yourself in a certain way that will not mark you as a target for some of the challenges that sometimes people will experience on the road. So that's probably the trifecta: flexibility, intuition, and street sense.
Well, thank you very much. And I think we'll wrap it up here. And we will send out to everyone lots of links, because there've been lots of things that Nora has mentioned that will be really useful for you, including perhaps most importantly, a link to her website. She really has just about everything you need on this subject. So thank you so much, Nora. As always, it is a pleasure to have you as a guest. And as always, you give us so much information. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure. I have a free gift that I want to offer to everybody here as well. It is just go to theprofessionalhobo.com/free gift. And there you will find a checklist of 10 things to do before you travel long term. And that'll give you the sort of things that you need to think about in order to cover the bases so you can travel effectively and stress free.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us. We're just going to stop the recording and then we'll do a draw. But thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we'll see you again in a month's time.